Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings and here on Now TV. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I truly do appreciate you being with me. I want to take note of the fact that as I have been doing lately, the viewership on YouTube, now that's strictly YouTube, remember, uh, absolutely does not count all of those in the wider potential audience for Now TV, which literally gets into the hundreds of million people. But nonetheless, the viewership on YouTube is reaching over 1,000 people in approximately a week. And I understand that's not viral. I wish it was. But nonetheless, we're reaching more and more people all the time. And for that, we are just tremendously thankful. The positive remarks are rolling in on a daily basis, and people are beginning to understand the importance of being able to answer the challenge of Christ. Now, what is the challenge of Christ? For those of you who may possibly be new and first time viewers, Jesus issued a challenge concerning himself and his ministry and his word in John chapter 10, verse 37. He said, "Do not believe me for my words' sake, believe me for my works. If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me." That's the point of what Jesus was saying. You know, we've got a saying in America, and particularly in Arkansas and Oklahoma, where I've been raised, and that is put up or shut up. And it's not enough to say, well, I'm this or I'm that, or I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. But if you stake your claim, if you stake your very identity on doing what you say you're going to do, and that's precisely what Jesus does in John chapter 10. He is staking his entire identity as the Son of God. He is staking his entire reputation as a true prophet of God on whether or not he kept his word. Now, this is really, really important in the environment in which we find ourselves in modern 21st century America and 21st century Christianity, because there are increasing threats. You know, for instance, just this last week, William Bell and I were talking, my great friend, and by the way, be sure to tune in to Now TV, 7:30 Central Time on Saturday afternoons to tune in to William Bell's great teaching. Nonetheless, William and I were talking on the phone, and he said that he recently had an encounter with some Muslims on an internet social platform. And there were some Muslims on there just giving Christians fits, just absolutely giving them fits because they kept saying Jesus Christ made false prophecies. Chief among them, he said he was going to come back on the clouds of glory with the angels, with the shout of a trumpet in the first century. Some of the people living then would not die until they saw that event. Well, the Christians that were on that blog, on that forum, whatever you wish to call it, were all futurists. They were unfamiliar with the challenge of Christ. Many of them didn't even realize Jesus said, "Do not believe me for my words' sake, believe me for my works." They didn't realize that Jesus had issued that challenge concerning himself. Are you? I've got to tell you, some years ago, I would set up a booth at the Abilene Christian University lectureship or at different venues. And when people would come by, now remember, we were engaging with theological students, with MDiv students. We were even engaging with PhD professors. And when we would share with them the challenge of Christ, it was stunning. Many of these elders, deacons, even professors, when they would see that challenge, many of them would say, literally, we're talking some extremely well-educated people here. Many of them would literally go, I had no idea that was in the Bible. Wow. Well, I can tell you right now, Muslims, Jews, atheists, they know it's in the Bible. So anyway, William was taking part in this blog, and these Muslims were having, pardon me, having a field day attacking these Christians. No Christian could provide an answer to the challenge of Christ. So William chimed in, demonstrating that this language of the coming of the Lord on the clouds of heaven with the angels in power and great glory was typical apocalyptic metaphoric language. It's used throughout the Tanakh, that's the Old Testament, to speak of any time in which Yahweh would, in his sovereignty, use one nation to judge another nation. Anytime that he did that, he was said to come, with flaming fire, with a shout, with the angels. And it would be his coming to destroy heaven and earth. You catch the power of that? And so, as he presented that information to these Muslims, they had never heard it, totally unfamiliar with it. They were literally blown away at how William Bell demonstrated that the Bible provides the answer to the challenge of Christ. And listen to me, folks. It is way, 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 way past time that the modern church comes to grip with how serious this challenge really is. I've been on Now TV for a good little while now. Somebody told me the other day it's 5 years. I'm not even sure about that. I lose track of time so easy. Always have. It's not anything new with me. I really, I don't remember dates very well. I do remember my wife's birthday. I do remember our anniversary, so there is that. Okay? Gotcha. That's a lifesaver right there. So anyway, I've been on Now TV. I've been sharing with you the challenge of Christ. Now, fundamental to this challenge of Christ is the doctrine, obviously, of the last days and the identity of the last days. 99% of all Christianity says, we're in the last days. 99% of all Christians say, you know what? Christ will come at the end of the last days. He will come at the last day. And the Muslims and the atheists, etc., say, well, you've got a real problem. Jesus said he was going to come in the first century. Therefore, the last days were in the first century. And that means that the last day was supposed to be in the first century because he said some of those people standing there 2,000 years ago would not die until they saw him coming in his kingdom. Of necessity, ladies and gentlemen, that means that Jesus was teaching that the end of the last days and the last day was to be in the first century. Well, here once again, the atheists, Muslims, Jews, etc., say, but he clearly didn't do it. Time marches on. The universe is still here. The church has done and continues to do a miserable job of understanding the nature of apocalyptic language. Now, make no mistake, there have been some really, really great, wonderful, incredible scholars down through the centuries who have gone, for instance, to 2 Peter chapter 3 concerning the day of the Lord and the earth and the elements therein being burned up. And they have said, and they have taught. Owen is one of them. Owen taught, anyone familiar at all with apocalyptic language understands that Peter is talking about not the end of the physical creation, not the end of time, not the end of the Christian age. He was talking about the end of the old covenant age that arrived in AD 70 with the destruction of Jerusalem. So, pardon me, modern day preterists are not the ones who invented this concept. Adam Clarke, commenting on Matthew chapter 24. Here is Jesus predicting the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And the apostles immediately asked, tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming, your parousia, and the end of the age? The end of the age there is generally, in the majority of Christianity, understood to be the end of the current Christian age. Well, there's a real problem with this because the Christian age has no end. I won't take the time to develop that now, but the point of fact is, it is undeniably true. The Christian age has no end. Well, Adam Clarke, writing almost 200 years ago, if I remember exactly when he wrote, Adam Clarke is still a highly respected scholar. To this day, excellent Hebrew scholar. Adam Clarke said, the apostles were not asking about the end of the current Christian age. They were asking about the end of the old covenant age, that temple, Jerusalem temple, that Jesus had just predicted was going to fall in his generation. They were asking about the end of that age, the end of the old covenant age. So once again, once we understand, ladies and gentlemen, once we understand that the Bible never predicts the end of time, never predicts the end of the Christian age, never predicts the end of material creation, but rather, listen to me carefully, and please catch the power of this. The only age that was to ever end was the old covenant age of Israel with the dissolution of the Jerusalem temple. That Jerusalem temple did not represent the time-space continuum. That temple represented one age and only one age. And that's the Old Covenant age. I mean, after all, in Solomon's time, the Ark of the Covenant was in there. And what was in it? Well, the Ark of the Covenant. Wait a minute, let me say that. The Ark of the Covenant. What covenant? The Old Testament covenant. Those 10 commandments did not represent the Christian age. The Ark of the Covenant did not represent the Christian age. The Ark of the Covenant, the most holy place, that entire temple complex represented and symbolized the Old Covenant age, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, when Jesus said, not one stone will be left standing on top of another here, the apostles automatically concluded that he was talking, once again, not about the end of the Christian age, not about the end of time. He was talking about the end of the age that temple represented. Now, here's what that means. And this is why this is so critical. The atheists, just like most Christians, they go to Matthew chapter 24 and they say, see, the apostles were asking about the end of the age. Well, they were asking about the end of the age. But the great question is, what age? Did the apostles believe for even one moment that temple represented the Christian age? Where would they get that idea? It's not biblical in any way, shape, form, or fashion. So when Jesus predicted the end of that temple, the apostles understood, and when he said it was going to happen in that generation, guess what the apostles would have known? They would have known they were living in the last days of the Old Covenant age. Do you follow that? The temple represented the Old Covenant age. Jesus said this temple is going to be destroyed in this generation. Therefore, the end of the old covenant age, represented by the temple, the last days, and therefore the last day of that old covenant age was to be in that first century generation. We have to engage in massive eisegesis. Now, eisegesis is kind of a fancy word, but eisegesis means to read something into a text that is not there. Exegesis, another kind of fancy word. Exegesis means to draw out of a text what is legitimately there. Not something that's read into the text, eisegesis. No, to draw out from the text what is there. Now we do that. I'm turning over here to Isaiah 2 through 4. We do that, ladies and gentlemen, by looking not only at the words of that text, but the overall context relating to that text. Okay? So my question to you is, and my question to all of the viewers is, what was there about the destruction of that temple that would have caused the apostles to ask about the end of time? Now, you see, you have to understand that the great majority of commentators tell us, and I wrote a book on this. The name of that book is, let me see, I don't have that book right here on my desk. Okay. The name of that book is Watching for the Parousia, Were Jesus' Apostles Confused? Now, it's absolutely critical. It's fundamental to the futurist view to be able to prove that the apostles were confused, that they wrongly associated the fall of the Jerusalem temple with the end of time and the end of human history. But wait a minute. Is that what the last days are all about? Well, the atheist believes that it is. I've been engaged on YouTube with some atheists who said, well, Jesus very clearly said he was going to come back in the judgment of men riding on the clouds, and he certainly did not do that. This guy does not have a clue in the world about the nature of apocalyptic language. Not a clue. He has not a clue in the world about the significance of the fall of Jerusalem as it relates to the last days. And don't forget, I wrote a book entitled The Last Days Identified. In this book, I examine every single major Old Testament and New Testament text that mentions the last days, and I demonstrate it has nothing to do with the end of the Christian age. Nothing. It has nothing to do with the last day of the Christian age. Now, what I'm getting at here, ladies and gentlemen, is that when Jesus was predicting the end of the temple, he was predicting the end of the age that the temple represented. He was predicting the coming of the last day of the age that the temple represented. And that means Jesus was talking about, in his eschatology, he was talking about covenant eschatology. He was not talking about historical eschatology. Now, I'm saying all of this so that we can get back to Isaiah chapter 2 through 4, and I understand this is a good bit of introduction, but for those who may not have been with us a lot, this is absolutely critical. The Bible is not concerned with historical eschatology, i.e. the end of human history. That is the assumption of the majority of Christians. It is the assumption of atheists and Muslims and Jews. But let me reiterate, the Bible does not predict historical eschatology, the end of history. The Bible is concerned with covenant eschatology, the end of the old covenant age, the end of the age that the temple represented. And there's only one age that temple represented, and that was the age of Moses and the law. Okay. Again, all of that leads us back to Isaiah chapter 2. Well, why is that? Well, because Peter in 2 Peter chapter 3 was talking about the last days and the coming of the Lord at the end of the last days, when he said, the earth and the elements therein shall be burned up. All of that was to happen in the last days. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 2 and 3. All right? One of the foundational Old Testament prophecies of the last days and the day of the Lord is Isaiah chapters 2 through 4. So what I've been doing over the last couple of weeks is sharing with you the question of, are we in the last days? And the unequivocal answer to that is, based upon Isaiah chapters 2 through 4, no, we are not in the last days. Now, how do we prove that from Isaiah chapters 2 through 4? We prove that by noticing, in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the tops of the mountains and exalted above the hills. So in the last days, the Messianic temple, the house of the Lord, will be established. Well, Paul, writing to Timothy, somewhere around 62, 63, 64, said, these things I am writing unto you, that you may know how you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God, which is the church of the living God. Isaiah chapter 2, the house of the Lord would be established in the last days. Paul, writing to Timothy, said the house of the Lord had been established. That means the house of the Lord was in the last days. Was he saying that in the last days, the house of the Lord would be established? Or in other words, was he saying in the Christian age, the house of the Lord will be established? No. In the last days of the Old Covenant age, the unending, everlasting, eternal house of the Lord, i.e. the church, would be established, but the Old Covenant house of the Lord would pass away. And that's what Jesus was predicting in Matthew chapter 24. So we continue in Isaiah. Boy, I'm telling you what, I'm really running out of time here. Okay, now notice that he says all nations shall flow into it. Now you have to understand that even though God said that it was the original purpose and intent of the Jerusalem temple for any man of any nation, those who were not even of the house of Israel, were welcome to come. And he said, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations. Now, it's absolutely tragic that the Jews absolutely refused to take that to heart. And they put up a wall of petition to keep Gentiles out, even threatening them with death if they went into the temple area. Now, they were always outside. But God said, my temple shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations. Well, guess what's happening here in Isaiah? Here in Isaiah, we have the establishment of the house of God, and all the nations shall flow into it. Okay. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but my MacBook is bringing up a message on my screen, just popped up again, saying Team Viewer quit unexpectedly. And it just keeps popping up just about every 10 or 15 seconds. I hope you're not able to see that. You shouldn't be able to, since it's kind of an internal thing, but it's very aggravating. I've got to talk to a tech about that. So anyway, what was Jesus saying in Matthew chapter 28, 18 to 20? Go ye therefore and preach the gospel to every nation, ethnoi. Okay? Isaiah chapter 2. All nations in the Septuagint, ethnoi. All nations shall flow into it. They'll go up to the house of the Lord. Now I want you to notice something. This is really, really, really critical. So in the last days, the house of the Lord, the Messianic temple, would be established, and all nations would flow into it. But as he was getting ready to ascend, Jesus told his apostles, go therefore into all nations, preach the gospel to every nation. Do you reckon that's the all nations of Isaiah chapter 2? Well, of course it is. And here's what's interesting about this. In 2 Chronicles chapter 36, we have the story of how the king of Persia gave permission that all nations were to come up to Jerusalem, that the temple would be rebuilt. And he said the God of heaven had given him authority over all nations of the earth. And he said, anyone, everywhere is free to go up there to Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple. All right? Now look, scholar after scholar after scholar recognizes that Jesus was drawing directly on that. So here is Cyrus giving permission to rebuild the temple and for all nations to flow there. Now here is Jesus saying, all authority has been given unto me in heaven and in earth. Go therefore and preach the gospel to every creature, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. So here's Cyrus authorizing the building of the temple, calling all nations. Here is Jesus authorizing the preaching of the gospel to all the nations to call them into this messianic temple. Cyrus was talking about a physical temple. Jesus is talking about the temple built upon the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. In other words, it's a living temple. Folks, you see the power here of what's going on? But you see, that church was established in the first century. It was glorified in the first century, perfected in the first century, and now all men of every nation, as Revelation chapter 21 teaches, are invited to come into that temple. I'm out of time. I'll see you next week.